Welcome to the new video of Neurophilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The illusion of wasted potential. There are days when you look at your life and quietly think, this can't be it. You may have responsibilities, a routine, maybe even achievements that look good from the outside. But somewhere deep inside, there is a silent ache, a feeling that you are living at only a fraction of what you're capable of. It's not that your life is a disaster. It's that it feels smaller than you. You sense something powerful within you, creative, alive, original, that never fully comes out. It appears in brief flashes, when you have an idea that excites you, when you imagine a different version of your life, when you feel strangely inspired by a movie, a book, or a conversation. For a moment, you remember that you are more than your routine. Then the moment passes, and the old life closes in again. You scroll through social media or watch people around you, and it seems like everyone else is getting somewhere. They travel, launch projects, share milestones, appear confident and self-assured. You, meanwhile, carry a quiet, uncomfortable certainty. You are capable of much more than you are currently living. Society has given this feeling a name: wasted potential. And the usual explanation is simple and cruel. You're not trying hard enough. You're lazy. You lack discipline. You're not serious about your goals. But what if that explanation is a lie? Alan Watts suggested that many of us live inside a kind of collective spell, a social illusion about what a good life is supposed to look like. From a young age, you were trained to measure your worth by how high you climb: higher income, higher status, higher productivity, higher recognition. Life becomes an endless ladder: school, university, job, promotion, house, family, retirement. Tick the boxes, climb the steps. The problem is not that ambition is bad. The problem is that no one asked you if this ladder was even leaning against the right wall. You were encouraged, sometimes gently, sometimes aggressively, to chase goals that were never truly yours, to follow a path that made sense on paper, but not in your heart. You took jobs that didn't inspire you. You adopted lifestyles that quietly drained you. And all of this was justified by an invisible promise. One day, if you keep pushing, you'll finally feel fulfilled. One day, when you earn more, when you get promoted, when you buy the house, when you finally have free time. But that one day doesn't arrive. Whenever you reach one milestone, the sense of emptiness doesn't disappear. It just shifts. You might enjoy a brief high, then the same restless feeling returns. Is this really it? This is where Watts' perspective becomes uncomfortable but freeing. He compared life not to a journey with a final destination, but to music. Nobody listens to a song just to get to the last note. The value is in the melody as it unfolds. In the same way, the point of life is not to arrive somewhere in the future. It is to be fully alive now. Yet you were taught to live as if life were a race, always running toward something, always moving toward a vague future where everything will finally make sense. In this race, the present moment becomes nothing more than a stepping stone, never the main event. So you tell yourself you are wasting your potential because you haven't arrived there yet. You haven't hit the big goal, the big title, the big moment. But the deeper tragedy is different. You may be wasting your potential not because you failed to reach the future, but because you never allowed yourself to live fully here. This is not a question of talent. It is a question of alignment. You are not broken. You are misaligned. The world has encouraged you to build an identity based on expectations. Be responsible in this way, successful in that way, acceptable in this specific form. In the process, you were slowly trained to ignore the most important voice you have, your own inner voice. That voice doesn't speak in schedules, metrics, or job titles. It speaks in feelings: aliveness, curiosity, joy, discomfort, resistance. It tells you when something is deeply wrong, even if everything looks fine. It tells you what you truly long for, even when you're afraid to admit it. But over time, you learn to silence it. Be realistic. Be sensible. Don't be dramatic. Everyone lives like this. Just accept it. And little by little, you disconnected from yourself. The result is that strange, painful mix of emotions. You are functioning, but not fulfilled. Busy, but not alive. Surrounded by people, yet strangely alone with your truth. This is the illusion of wasted potential. The feeling that something is wrong with you, when in reality, something is wrong with the story you were given about what your life should be. In this book, or video, or journey, whichever format you're using, we are not here to make you more productive or more efficient at climbing someone else's ladder. We are here to question the ladder itself. You will explore why you feel suffocated even when you do everything right. You will confront a brutal idea. Mediocrity is not failing to be extraordinary. Mediocrity is never discovering who you really are. And most importantly, you will begin to understand this. You don't need to become more in order to be worthy. You need to become truer in order to be alive. If you often feel like you're living only half a life, let this be your wake-up call. Time is passing with or without your permission. The real question is no longer, do I have potential? The real question is, will you keep playing the role others handed you? Or will you finally start living as yourself? The silent addiction to postponement. There is a habit so common, so socially accepted, that almost no one questions it, yet it quietly destroys more lives than failure ever could. It is not laziness. It is not fear in its obvious form. It is the addiction to waiting. You tell yourself that you will start living when things settle down, when the money is better, when the stress is lower, when the degree is finished, when the family responsibilities ease, when the world becomes more stable. The sentence always begins with the same word, when. When this happens, then I will live. At first, this sounds responsible, mature, sensible. You convince yourself that you are being patient, that you are simply preparing for the right moment. But silently, without drama or warning, your life begins to disappear into preparation mode. Days turn into months, months into years, and the right moment never arrives. Alan Watts called this one of the most dangerous diseases of the modern mind, the disease of postponement. The tragedy of postponement is that it always feels reasonable. You are not refusing life. You are just delaying it. You are not saying no forever, just not yet. And because the delay feels practical, you rarely notice that you are slowly training yourself to live in the future instead of the present. You begin to believe that your real life is always about to begin, but never actually does. Western culture reinforces this illusion from the very beginning. You are taught that life is a straight road with checkpoints along the way. Finish school so that you can get into college. Get into college so that you can land a good job. Work the job so that you can climb the ladder. Climb the ladder so that one day you can finally relax and enjoy life. In this story, today is never important on its own. Today exists only as a sacrifice for a better tomorrow. Watts dismantled this entire way of thinking with one devastating question. What if there is no final destination at all? What if the point is not to arrive somewhere else, but to be fully present where you already are? Most people live as if the present moment were only a rehearsal. They tolerate their current life instead of inhabiting it. They swallow frustration by promising themselves future happiness. They trade away real moments for imagined ones. But here is the brutal truth. The future does not exist the way your mind imagines it. It is a mental projection, an idea, an abstraction. And while you chase it, your only real possession, the present, slips through your fingers unnoticed. Postponement wears many disguises. It calls itself responsibility. It calls itself realism. It calls itself patience. It even calls itself wisdom. But underneath all of these names, the mechanism is the same. You are avoiding the risk of truly living now. Think about your own life with complete honesty. How many things have you delayed this year alone? How many conversations have you avoided? How many dreams have you reduced to later? How many decisions have you postponed because you were waiting to feel more confident, more certain, more prepared? And what if that readiness never comes? Watts warned that as long as you wait for an ideal scenario before allowing yourself to live truthfully, you will remain trapped. Not because you are incapable, but because you are asking life for guarantees it cannot give. There is a quiet violence in postponement. You do not feel it in a single dramatic moment. You feel it in the slow erosion of enthusiasm, in the dulling of curiosity, in the way your days start to look the same, in how the fire you once felt becomes a distant memory rather than a living force. You might believe your potential is wasting away because you do not work hard enough, but the deeper reality is more unsettling. Your potential is being smothered by endless waiting. Waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel safe, waiting to feel approved, waiting to feel certain. But certainty is the last thing life offers. The present is not a bridge into your real life. The present is your real life. Every day you delay your truth in the name of preparation, you strengthen the habit of avoidance. Over time, your courage weakens. Your instincts go quiet. You become skilled at surviving, but not at living. Watts insisted that postponement is not just a time problem. It is a self-identity problem. When you constantly place your life in the future, you subtly tell yourself that who you are now is not enough to be lived. You send yourself a quiet but devastating message. I am not allowed to exist fully yet. And so existence becomes conditional. You exist when you earn more. You exist when you prove yourself. You exist when you finally meet their expectations. Until then, you remain suspended. Time, however, does not wait for your permission. It moves forward without negotiation. Years pass with terrifying speed. And one day you may wake up with the horrifying clarity that you spent most of your life getting ready to live. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to wake you up. You do not need a perfect life to begin living truthfully. You do not need ideal conditions to take an honest step. You do not need to be fearless. You only need to stop lying to yourself about where your life actually happens. It happens now. But here is the honest struggle that follows next. Many people realize they are postponing, but then face a deeper problem. They no longer even know what they want. Years of conditioning have blurred the line between true desire and external influence. The voice of society becomes louder than the voice of the soul. That question, what do I actually want, can feel terrifying when you've spent your life preparing for someone else's version of success. That is where the next chapter begins. Because until you discover what you would live for if fear, money, and expectations were stripped away, delaying will always feel safer than truth. Discovering what you truly want. At some point after years of waiting, delaying, and silencing yourself, a disturbing question begins to rise inside you. What if I don't even know what I really want anymore? This is one of the deepest wounds caused by conditioning. You were trained for so long to follow paths designed by others, parents, teachers, society, that your own desires began to fade into the background. You learned what was useful, what was respectable, what was safe. But slowly the quiet voice that once whispered what made you feel alive grew faint. Alan Watts shattered this numbness with a question so simple that it shocks the mind awake. What would you do with your life if money were not a concern? Not what would you choose if it paid well. Not what would make others proud. Not what sounds impressive. What would you actually do if fear were removed from the equation? This question is terrifying because it destroys the elegant structure you've built around yourself. Suddenly, careers, titles, 5-year plans, and social status lose their authority. You realize how many of your logical choices were not born from passion, but from fear. Fear of poverty, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing others, fear of looking foolish, fear of standing alone. Most people never answer this question honestly, not because they don't want to, but because honesty would demand a reckoning. It would force them to admit that they may have spent years chasing a life that was never meant for them. And that truth is painful. You may discover that what you truly want does not fit neatly into society's idea of success. It may not impress relatives. It may not promise immediate security. It may even seem irrational. But the problem is not that your desires are wrong. The problem is that you were taught to distrust them. From a young age, you were quietly trained to exchange desire for approval, to trade curiosity for compliance, to convert passion into practicality. Over time, you learned to censor yourself before anyone else had to. You stopped asking, what excites me? And started asking, what is acceptable? This is how the soul becomes domesticated. Watts never suggested that you should recklessly abandon responsibility. He did not romanticize chaos. What he demanded was much more dangerous. Truth. The courage to stop living a lie. The courage to take even the smallest steps toward alignment. You don't need to burn down your entire life overnight, but you do need to stop pretending that what feels empty is somehow enough. Discovery begins in silence. Put everything aside for a moment. The noise of expectation, the weight of obligation, the opinions of others. Sit with yourself without distraction. Ask the question again, slowly and without negotiation. If I did not need to impress anyone, if I did not fear judgment, if money were not a concern, how would I actually want to spend my days? At first, the mind will offer safe answers, familiar answers, acceptable answers. But if you wait long enough, something deeper emerges. A quiet pull, a forgotten longing, a version of you that once felt obvious before it was buried. And here is the truth most people avoid. Your answer reveals your real potential, not the kind measured by productivity charts or performance reviews, but the kind that carries meaning, the kind that gives you energy instead of draining it, the kind that makes you wake up with eagerness instead of dread. Your real potential is not something you need to manufacture. It already exists as a natural direction inside you. Your only task is to stop walking against it. But there is a second, more uncomfortable realization that often follows. If you truly know what you want, you can no longer hide behind confusion, because confusion protects you. It allows you to delay. It allows you to pretend you are still figuring things out. But once your truth becomes visible, avoidance becomes a conscious choice. And that is where fear strikes hardest. You may fear disappointing your parents. You may fear losing financial stability. You may fear being misunderstood. You may fear failing publicly. You may fear succeeding and no longer recognizing yourself. So you negotiate with your soul. I'll do it later, after one more year, when things calm down. But the deeper truth is this. No one is coming to give you permission to live your truth. You can wait decades for approval that will never arrive. Or you can accept the quiet responsibility of choosing your own life. Watts believed that as long as you try to adapt your soul to the demands of the system, mediocrity will follow you, no matter how impressive your external success becomes. You may be admired, you may be wealthy, you may be praised, and still feel hollow, because success without alignment is simply a beautiful prison. Yet here is the most hopeful truth of all. The smallest honest step changes everything. You don't need to abandon your entire world to begin. You can begin by reclaiming 1 hour of your week, one small project, one boundary, one truth spoken where you once stayed silent, one decision made for yourself instead of for approval. Every act of alignment strengthens your inner voice. Every act of courage weakens the grip of fear. But even after you rediscover your truth, another invisible force still remains, something even more subtle, more powerful, and more difficult to escape. Because even when you know what you want, you may still be trapped inside the roles you perform every day without realizing it. And that is where the next chapter begins. Because perhaps you are not failing to live your truth. Perhaps you are simply performing a character that is not you. The prison of social roles. By the time you begin to sense what you truly want, another realization follows. Quiet, unsettling, and difficult to admit. Even if you know your truth, you may still feel unable to live it. Why? Because long before you chose your path, you learned how to perform. Alan Watts observed that most human beings do not live as who they are. They live as who they were trained to be. They grow into carefully shaped roles, roles that earn approval, attention, safety, and belonging. And over time, these roles feel so natural that you forget they were ever learned in the first place. You may recognize yourself in one of these. The responsible one, the dependable one, the achiever, the caretaker, the strong one, the sensible one. On the surface, these identities look admirable. Society praises them, rewards them, needs them. But what is rarely discussed is the cost. A role is not a self. A role is a mask you learn to wear in order to survive. As a child, you were fluid. You played, imagined, questioned, felt deeply, expressed freely. But gradually, rules began to shape you. Don't say that. Don't feel that. Don't want that. Be polite. Be realistic. Be acceptable. And slowly, without realizing it, you learned when to hide your sadness, when to bury your anger, when to silence your curiosity. You learned how to edit yourself. At first, it protected you, but over the years, it became a cage. Watts warned that many people spend their entire lives inside a character they did not consciously choose. They become the personality that fits expectations, not the nature that fits their soul. And the longer you play a role, the harder it becomes to tell where the mask ends and you begin. This is why success can feel strangely empty. You may achieve the promotion, build the business, maintain the image, be admired for your discipline and strength, but inside something feels missing. Not because you failed, but because it was not you who succeeded. It was the character. And so even applause can sound hollow. This is the most invisible form of mediocrity. Not a miserable life, a respectable one. A life that looks correct on the outside and feels disconnected on the inside. A life where you function smoothly but feel quietly absent. Watts compared this to an actor who forgets he is on stage. The performance continues. The audience applauds. But the actor no longer remembers who he is outside the script. The soul grows silent while the role grows louder. Ask yourself this with brutal honesty. How much of your daily behavior is driven by who you truly are? And how much is driven by who you must appear to be? How often do you say yes just to avoid conflict? How often do you smile just to maintain harmony? How often do you silence your truth because it feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, or risky? Every time you do this, you reinforce the mask. And over time, the mask becomes heavy. The cruelest part is this. The more you suppress your authenticity to maintain your role, the weaker your inner voice becomes. Eventually, you begin to confuse your function with your identity. You don't know who you are. You know only what you do. You don't feel like a human being. You feel like a task. Yet even here, Watts offered quiet hope. He did not say, destroy your life overnight. He said, start making cracks in the mask. A single honest boundary can weaken a lifetime of pretending. A single truth spoken can restore years of silence. A single brave no can return your power. A single fearful yes can unlock forgotten doors. Each small act of authenticity is a strike against the script of mediocrity. You don't need to abandon every role at once. Some roles will remain: parent, worker, partner, citizen. But they must become things you play, not things you are. The moment a role becomes your identity, it becomes a prison. The danger is not responsibility. The danger is self-erasure. But here is where the shift becomes truly radical. Even when you begin to loosen the mask, you may notice another powerful force pulling you forward. The obsession with becoming, progressing, improving, reaching. You realize that it's not just the roles that trap you. It's the belief that you are always on your way to somewhere else, that your real life has not started yet, that you are permanently in progress. And so the unmasking reveals something even deeper. It is not enough to stop performing. You must also stop chasing. Because the moment you stop living for a destination, a new way of being becomes possible. A way of being that does not depend on applause, future rewards, or external validation. A way of being grounded in presence. This is where the illusion of progress collapses. This is where the race ends. This is where life stops being preparation and begins to feel like presence. And that is where the next chapter begins. Because the final prison is not the role you play. It is the belief that who you are is always somewhere ahead of you and never allowed to be fully here. You are not separate from life. At the deepest level of all the struggles you've explored so far, misaligned goals, endless postponement, false desires, and suffocating roles, there lies one final illusion. It is the most powerful one of all. The belief that you are a separate individual, isolated from life, struggling alone to prove your worth. Alan Watts called this the root confusion of modern humanity. From childhood, you were taught to think of yourself as a somebody inside a body, facing an external world that you must compete with, conquer, or survive. You were trained to believe that life is happening to you, not as you. And from this belief, fear becomes logical. Anxiety becomes constant. Comparison becomes inevitable. Because if you are alone in a hostile world, then you must fight to earn your place. This is why so much of your energy goes into becoming better, smarter, stronger, more impressive, more successful. You feel an invisible pressure to upgrade yourself endlessly, as if your worth were always incomplete. But Watts offered a truth that collapses this entire system of fear. You are not an ego struggling inside the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself through a human form. You did not come into the world. You came out of it. Just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, you are not separate from existence. You are a temporary expression of something vast, intelligent, and alive. Your body, your breath, your awareness, your imagination, none of these are accidents. You are not an outsider here. You belong to life as deeply as the stars belong to the sky. When this realization begins to settle in, something extraordinary happens. The need to prove yourself weakens. The urge to compete softens. The fear of falling behind loosens its grip. Because if you are already an expression of life itself, then your value is not something you earn. It is something you are. This changes everything. Your potential is no longer a ladder you must climb. It is a flower that unfolds when you stop forcing it. Your purpose is no longer to become better than anyone else. It is to become fully, unmistakably you. The universe does not need perfect copies. It needs singular expressions. There has never been another life with your exact combination of experiences, sensitivities, wounds, talents, contradictions, perceptions, and intuitions. And there never will be again. When you compare yourself to others, you deny this uniqueness. You try to mold yourself into a form that was never designed for you, and in doing so, you starve the world of the only version of life that only you can offer. Watts warned that comparison is spiritual poison, because the universe doesn't repeat itself. No leaf, no cloud, no human life is duplicated. Every attempt to imitate someone else is a refusal to fulfill your own design. Your task here is not to be extraordinary in society's sense. Your task is to be authentic in existence's sense. And here is the paradox that shocks the ego. When you stop trying to control, dominate, and perfect yourself, life begins to flow more naturally than ever before. This is what the Taoists called Wu Wei, effortless action. Not because you do nothing, but because you finally stop fighting against who you are. You act without forcing. You move without resistance. You create without fear of judgment. Life no longer feels like a war to be won. It becomes a current to move with. This is the end of mediocrity, not because you suddenly become famous, wealthy, or admired, but because you finally become real. Mediocrity is not a lack of talent. It is a life lived from the outside in. It is obedience without inner agreement. It is survival without expression. The moment you stop living by borrowed scripts and begin living from direct awareness, the false self collapses, not violently, quietly, naturally. As a dream fades when you wake up. Life does not become easy, but it becomes honest. Struggle may remain, but it becomes meaningful. Fear may still appear, but it no longer controls the architecture of your existence. You realize that you don't need to be more, do more, achieve more, or prove more. You need to remove what was never you to begin with. Your masks fall, your roles loosen, your urgency softens, your presence deepens, and suddenly the life you were waiting for all along is no longer in the future. It is here. Now comes the most important moment of all, not a philosophical idea, not a poetic realization, but a direct question placed into your hands like a mirror. What part of yourself have you been hiding out of fear? What truth have you been postponing because it felt dangerous, inconvenient, or unacceptable? You don't have to announce it to the world. You only have to admit it to yourself, because the moment you name your truth, even in silence, you take your life back from the illusion. And if you choose to declare it, even in a few simple words, you turn authenticity from an idea into a living commitment. This is not the end of a journey. This is the end of pretending, and from here forward, every step you take may still be uncertain, imperfect, and challenging, but it will finally be yours.